high and
Is the
elementary
time.
school, kids are making that choice. Are they going to smoke?
In 1994, Loni Anderson made headlines not for a dazzling new role or red carpet appearance, but for accusing her ex-husband, Burt Reynolds, of physical abuse and emotional cruelty during their high-profile divorce. What began as a glamorous Hollywood marriage ended in a public war of words, with Reynolds claiming Anderson had drained him financially, while she revealed in interviews and court documents the darker truths hidden behind their picture-perfect facade. The media frenzy that followed wasn't just tabloid fodder. It split public opinion, stained reputations, and cast a long shadow over both their careers. 30 decades later, Loni Anderson died quietly in a Los Angeles hospital on August 3, 2025, just 2 days before what would have been her 80th birthday. There were no headlines blaring across screens, no dramatic last interviews, no public farewell. Only a single press release, issued by her longtime publicist, confirmed her passing after what was described as a prolonged illness. The once celebrated star who had once captivated millions with her wit and beauty slipped away in near silence. And while the world barely noticed, one unresolved question lingered in the air. Had she ever truly escaped the shadow of that scandal? Loni K. Anderson was born on August 5, 1945, in St. Paul, Minnesota, the daughter of a model and an environmental chemist. From an early age, she exuded a poised confidence that set her apart, but it wasn't until her teenage years that the allure of the spotlight began to take hold. She won the title of Miss Roseville in 1963 and later attended the University of Minnesota, majoring in art. Yet the canvas she would ultimately paint on was not made of oils or charcoal. It was the glittering, unforgiving surface of Hollywood. Her early career in the late 1960s and early 1970s was marked by bit parts in television series and minor films. Roles on shows like SWAT, Policewoman, and Barnaby Jones established her as a familiar, though not yet headline-grabbing face. But it was in 1978 that her destiny shifted dramatically when she was cast as Jennifer Marlowe in the CBS sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati. As the station's hyper-intelligent and unflappably glamorous receptionist, Anderson shattered stereotypes. She was blonde, yes, but also composed, razor-sharp, and emotionally grounded. In a television landscape saturated with caricatures, Jennifer Marlowe stood out as a woman who owned her power without apology. The role earned Anderson critical acclaim and commercial success. She was nominated for 2 Emmy Awards and 3 Golden Globe Awards for her portrayal, and the show itself became a cult favorite, cementing her as a household name. At its peak, WKRP in Cincinnati reached millions of viewers each week, and Anderson's face was as common on magazine covers as it was on primetime TV. In the years that followed, Anderson capitalized on her newfound fame with a series of high-profile TV movies and guest appearances. Her performance as Jane Mansfield in the 1980 film The Jane Mansfield Story, opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger, was widely discussed for both its boldness and vulnerability. She starred in the NBC series Partners in Crime in 1984, alongside Linda Carter. And throughout the 80s, she became a fixture in America's television culture, playing characters that often dance the line between sensuality and strength. But Anderson was never content to be just a visual icon. She worked behind the scenes to gain more control over her image, frequently clashing with producers who attempted to reduce her roles to mere eye candy.
Her insistence on dignified characters and her ability to deliver performances that combined comedic timing with genuine emotional weight earned her a loyal fan base and, for a time, a degree of industry respect rare for women whose careers were rooted in their looks. Her last significant return to television came in the late 1990s and early 2000s with guest roles on shows like Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, and The Mullets, proving that even decades after her prime, Loni Anderson still carried that magnetic screen presence. In 2023, she surprised longtime fans by appearing in Ladies of the 80s, A Diva's Christmas, a Lifetime movie that reunited several iconic actresses from the golden age of television. It was a bittersweet, nostalgic return, and unbeknownst to many, her final performance.
By the time of her death, Anderson had accumulated a career spanning over 5 decades. She had defied the odds, outlasted the cynicism of a brutal industry, and quietly rewritten the archetype of what it meant to be a television blonde in America. For all the glamour that followed her rise to stardom, Loni Anderson's off-screen life was punctuated by turbulence, some of it deeply personal, some tragically public. The most defining and most damaging of these was her marriage to Burt Reynolds. The two met in the early 1980s when both were at the height of their fame. Reynolds, known for his swaggering charisma and box office dominance, was the reigning king of Hollywood. Anderson, with her image as television's sophisticated bombshell, seemed a perfect match. The press dubbed them Hollywood royalty, and their 1988 wedding, held in a lavish Beverly Hills estate, became tabloid gold. But the marriage, behind the facade, was built on shaky ground. According to both parties, the relationship began to fray almost immediately. What followed was one of the most bitter and public celebrity divorces of the 1990s. In 1993, Reynolds filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, but that term barely scratched the surface. In court filings and television interviews, Reynolds accused Anderson of extravagance and emotional manipulation. Anderson responded with allegations of abuse, stating that Reynolds had physically assaulted her and was emotionally volatile. The allegations shocked the public, especially since Reynolds, until that point, had largely cultivated a good old boy persona. The custody battle over their adopted son, Quentin, further inflamed the situation. Anderson fought for sole custody, accusing Reynolds of endangering their child's emotional well-being. Reynolds retaliated by claiming Anderson had manipulated the child against him. Ultimately, Anderson retained primary custody, but the wounds from the battle would never truly heal. Anderson did not back down. In her 2009 memoir, My Life in High Heels, she laid bare her experiences, not just with Reynolds, but with a lifetime of being commodified and underestimated in Hollywood. She wrote candidly about the fears she had lived with during their marriage, and about how the industry had punished her for speaking out. At a time when discussions about domestic abuse were still shrouded in stigma, Anderson's disclosures were seen as both brave and polarizing. Beyond her personal battles, Anderson also faced the slow erosion of the career she had worked so hard to build. By the late 1990s, roles had become scarce. She spoke openly about ageism and sexism in the entertainment industry, particularly for women whose early fame had been tied to their appearance. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times in 2001, she remarked, "Once they think you've aged out of a certain fantasy, they don't know where to put you anymore." There were other struggles, quiet ones. Anderson's daughter, Deidre Hoffman, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in the 2000s, prompting Anderson to step back from public life to provide support. It was during this time that she began working with health advocacy organizations, including campaigns raising awareness of COPD, a disease that had claimed the life of her mother. And then there was the persistent shadow of her public image. For all her accomplishments, Anderson was often reduced to caricature: the blonde bombshell, the ex-wife of Burt Reynolds, the former sitcom star. She knew it, and she fought it. In interviews, she resisted the idea that her worth began and ended with Jennifer Marlowe. She once said, "I created that character, but she didn't create me." In the end, Anderson's story was not one of scandal for scandal's sake, but of survival, of being reduced again and again and refusing to stay small. The press often called her a survivor, but few understood what exactly she had to survive.
By the time she reached her 70s, Loni Anderson had all but vanished from the Hollywood circuit. Gone were the bright lights, the premiere carpets, the talk show couches. In their place, quiet mornings in Los Angeles, long phone calls with her daughter, and an intentional retreat from the machine that had once devoured her youth. It wasn't bitterness that led her to step back. It was clarity. After decades of being dissected by tabloids and typecast by casting directors, Anderson chose privacy. Not exile, not defeat, just peace. In 2008, she married Bob Flick, a founding member of the folk group The Brothers Four. The two had first met in the early 1960s, long before fame had hardened their edges. Their reunion decades later was, in many ways, a quiet undoing of everything that had gone wrong before. Unlike the spectacle of her previous marriage, this one remained off-camera, deliberately so. They lived together in Sherman Oaks, California, and Anderson often described those years as the most stable and emotionally fulfilling of her life. Professionally, her appearances became rare, though not non-existent. In 2013, she gave a candid interview reflecting on the state of the industry and the double standards older actresses face. She noted how women like her were often discarded as past their prime, while men were allowed to age into gravitas. It wasn't a complaint, it was a fact, stated plainly. That same year, she attended several red carpet events alongside Flick, smiling gracefully but always deflecting questions about any comeback. Her final return to television came in 2023 in Ladies of the 80s, A Diva's Christmas, a made-for-TV Lifetime film that brought together several icons of the decade in a light-hearted, nostalgic reunion. It was Anderson's first acting role in years, and her last. The film was received warmly, not for its plot or performances, but for the simple joy of seeing familiar faces one more time. Behind the scenes, Anderson was reportedly frail but upbeat, insisting on doing her own makeup and helping younger actresses navigate the emotional pressures of set life. It was, according to a production assistant quoted anonymously, like watching someone walk through the halls of their own legacy. Health-wise, the details were sparse. Her family never confirmed a diagnosis, but the statement issued after her death referred to a prolonged illness, a phrase that says little, yet says enough. It was not sudden, it was not shocking, it was simply final. According to that same statement, she passed peacefully, with family by her side. There is no public record of last words, no journal entry, no whispered confession, just the stillness of a hospital room and the slow fade of a presence that once lit up living rooms across America. Her hands were held, her breathing slowed, and then at 6:42 a.m. she was gone, 2 days shy of her 80th birthday. The hospital staff, used to death in all its forms, moved gently around the room. Nurses offered tissues. A physician nodded softly to the family. The curtain remained half drawn. Outside the window, the California sun had begun to rise, washing the room in a golden haze that felt, for a brief moment, cinematic in a way even Hollywood couldn't script. Her publicist, Cheryl J. Kagan, made the call later that morning. The statement went out by early afternoon and was picked up by Variety, People, and a handful of other entertainment outlets. But the news was buried under a sea of headlines: politics, wildfires, another celebrity scandal. There were no memorial specials, no network tributes, no trending hashtags, just a quiet acknowledgement that a once beloved figure had exited the stage. And yet, in that hospital room, where no lights glared and no lenses intruded, the woman who had fought to reclaim her identity, who had survived scandal, humiliation, and erasure, was given a kind of ending few celebrities ever get. Private, tender, untouched by spectacle. No parting quote, no rehearsed goodbye, only a final exhale and the presence of those who truly knew her. When news of Loni Anderson's death was quietly released on the afternoon of August 3, 2025, the world paused, but only briefly. A few nostalgic headlines emerged. WKRP star Loni Anderson dies at 79. TV's iconic blonde says goodbye. Former co-stars issued kind, if restrained, tributes. Lifetime ran a late-night rerun of Ladies of the 80s with a small on-screen note in memoriam. But the news was buried under a sea of headlines: politics, wildfires, another celebrity scandal. There were no memorial specials, no network tributes, no trending hashtags, just a quiet acknowledgement that a once beloved figure had exited the stage. And yet, in that hospital room, where no lights glared and no lenses intruded, the woman who had fought to reclaim her identity, who had survived scandal, humiliation, and erasure, was given a kind of ending few celebrities ever get: private, tender, untouched by spectacle. No parting quote, no rehearsed goodbye, only a final exhale and the presence of those who truly knew her. When news of Loni Anderson's death was quietly released on the afternoon of August 3, 2025, the world paused, but only briefly. A few nostalgic headlines emerged. WKRP star Loni Anderson dies at 79. TV's iconic blonde says goodbye. Former co-stars issued kind, if restrained, tributes. Lifetime ran a late-night rerun of Ladies of the 80s with a small on-screen note in memoriam. But in the wider public consciousness, her passing slipped through the cracks of a distracted, faster world. There was no public funeral, no memorial service streamed online. The family chose privacy, as they had during her illness. Her estate was reportedly divided between her daughter and husband, with no major disputes or drama. In the end, she left behind no unfinished legal battles, no scandals to revisit, only a body of work that captured a moment in television history, and a generation of women who saw in her a different kind of strength. For those who grew up watching WKRP in Cincinnati, or who had followed her career through the shifting sands of TV culture, Anderson represented more than a role. She was evidence that a woman could be glamorous without being a joke, that softness and intelligence could coexist on screen without contradiction. Yet the silence that greeted her death raises a larger question, one that echoes across the fading careers of many once bright stars. When a woman who was once everywhere disappears and no one seems to notice, was it because she faded or because we forgot to look?